Holyfield 2 was June 28th, 1997. Bash at the Beach was July 13th, 1997. So we're looking at a window of about 2 weeks later to play on the ear-biting incident.
Yeah, well, and also I think everybody at the summer of 97 talk about biting somebody on the ear, so it wasn't like the only one. But anyway, that where I wanted to go with this was that is the night that Sandra said that Nancy called her on the phone at the show and told her come to the condo, and that's the night that she left. Was is she conflating two different time frames? Was it really the same night as Bash at the Beach? And since you were in the Keys at that point and she was living at the condo in Daytona, why did she need Sandra to come and take her and Chris away from anything when you weren't there to begin with? Was there any kind of issue between you and Nancy before or during Bash at the Beach that would have led urgency to this situation?
No, I think that Nancy was just having Sandra bring Chris to the condo.
But they didn't go anywhere after that.
Pardon me?
They didn't go anywhere after that. They just stayed at the condo.
Right.
So it was portrayed on the program as kind of a big, this is the break up and leave moment. Y'all already were living apart. And she had nothing to be rescued from because she was home alone, and they then went there. You were at the show.
Right, and I stayed in a hotel in Daytona that night.
Hey, can I jump in here real quick just because Sandra did an interview previously on Chris Jericho's podcast where she talked about this time frame, and she said that she was at the show. She was with your daughter, I believe, and then was at that show where she was told to go with Chris, and she said, why wouldn't I go with my brother-in-law? And she was told, go with Chris. I want to ask the question, at this period of time in 97, how close were Nancy and Sandra? Was she aware of what was going on in your relationship? Was she aware of the arrest that you had talked about earlier? How aware was she of what was happening in your relationship at that period of time, to the point where, as she said, she would have to be told not to go with you, but to go with Chris?
Well, first of all, my daughter wasn't there. I don't know. She might have got a timeline wrong there. And I had checked into a hotel before I went to the building. So Sandra had to know, because I'm assuming that we lived about 2 miles down the street where the Ocean Center was. I lived on Atlantic Avenue. And Sandra probably left from Nancy's place, knowing I wasn't there. I think that Sandra got her timeline a little mixed up. So, and if I wasn't there and I was wrestling in Daytona, she knew that Nancy and I were having problems. So I'm assuming she knows that I'm not coming back to the condo if I got a hotel room.
And this is one of those things that nobody knew to write all this stuff down because they didn't know that it was going to be being talked to. It was just personal things that were happening in y'all's lives. Nobody knew we were going to be discussing this 20-something years later or whatever. And that's what I found was that because what I've known of your guys' situation, that the timeline didn't necessarily fit of all these things. It was like they were conflated together in one or two different incidents in order to fit the narrative. But specifically, there was no aha moment. There was no moment when Nancy called her sister and said, come and help Chris sweep me away from all this.
No, I don't think so. I think that, she had to be introduced to, I can't say she had to be. I'm assuming she was introduced to Chris before she went back to Nancy's with him. I was just assuming that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know when they met or whatever, but I'm just assuming that.
What was the timeline like, or your, that was 97. And I know Benoit stayed with WCW until 2000. I think, were you in and out? Because once again, that late 90s musical chairs management, I know you were named the booker again after the Russo experiment went south quickly. But were you there as an employee the whole time? Point is, did you and Chris still work together that at least a good majority of that time for the next couple of years? How did your relationship change, or did it change with him?
Well, it really didn't change. As you probably recall, Jimmy, that's when Russo first came in. Him and Ed became he was the booker. I think Ed was his assistant. And during this period, I took a couple of months off when I was going through the divorce. And then I believe, and Brian, you'd be the guy to ask because you're great at timelines. Wasn't Terry Taylor involved in this too?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yes.
Right, Jimmy?
Yeah, I think I'm mooning off thinking because it sounds ridiculous that the people are saying, well, these grown men, they don't even remember what they were doing. The management and or creative situation in WCW in the late 90s changed every 3 to 6 months at best. So, but in that time frame, yes, Terry was doing something. There was a committee. Russo and Bischoff tried to work together at first, but of course they couldn't. And then they split, and then they put them back together again, and blah, blah, blah. But in the middle of that thing, you ended up being the booker, being named the booker again. And yes, that's the reason I asked you about your relationship with Chris, because that's when he and his group announced they wanted to leave.
Right. And
because they were afraid of retribution, allegedly. That's the story, is they were afraid of retribution with you now having control over their creative destiny. Was there going to be something taken out on them?
Right. So Russo came in. After I came back, I would go Monday and Tuesdays to the office, and sometimes Wednesdays. And he would throw ideas around, and I'd throw some stuff in, but I knew it wasn't going to work. Then all of a sudden, they came to me and said, we want you to take over. We don't like the direction of this going. The first thing I did when I took over, well, one of the first things I did was put the World Heavyweight belt on Chris Benoit. And Jimmy and Brian, you'll get a kick out of this story. There's a room. We go into finish. There's Sid Vicious, me, and Chris.
Oh, good Lord. I forgot it was Sid.
And I told Sid that he's going to tap out to the crossface. He looked at me like I was insane. So I had him tap out. The next
now,
day,
wait a minute. Don't bury this. Don't bury that. How did you possibly convince Sid Vicious, our old friend, 6'9", 325 pounds, to tap out to Chris Benoit? How were you that magic, that golden with your verbiage?
Well, he first said, no, this isn't going to work. And I talked to him and I said, listen, Sid, this guy's worked hard. I think he needs the shot. I think it would help the company. It will probably elongate your career. In this time when they were, Jimmy, as you recall, and Brian, you probably do, that they were rewarding people for doing their jobs.
Yeah.
And, right?
Yeah.
And I said, I said to Sid, you probably get an extension for doing this. And I said, you're not out of the running, Sid. I'm not going to send you to Siberia. You're a very intricate part because, hey, people can talk about Sid Vicious all they want. He drew money. He looked like $1 million. And I told Chris I was putting the belt on him that night before we went in with Sid. And I said, the other thing is you're going to be working with the NWO members, and more than likely, you're going to drop the belt to an NWO member on a screw because, that's what the NWO did. He was fine about it. When I talked to Sid about it, he said, no. And then I said the extension, and I said, Sid, this is the right thing to do. I'm not sending you. And he said, well, I've trusted you this far. I'll trust you again. And he did it. And then the next day, they said they wanted me fired. They wanted J.J. Dillon fired, and they wanted Mike Graham fired. And Bill Bush said, I'm not going to fire these guys. No call. What have they done? I said, well, it's what we think he's going to do. Well, I just said give him the belt to Chris Benoit.
And by the way, and once again, yes, Chris Benoit could have legitimately stretched Sid, I'm sure, 6 ways from Sunday, but that was his biggest high-profile career win to that point. Had y'all had cross words? Did he have a reason to think that you were going to put the world title on him and then just bury him? Or couldn't he see that way, you wanted to keep these guys? You were trying to show them.
That was my plan, was trying to show them what I was going to do for them. And the next week, Malenko and Perry Saturn were going to win the tag team belts. I had already made Eddie Guerrero the cruiserweight champion. Then I made him the U.S. champion on top of that, so I could justify to the audience how a cruiserweight could wrestle in the heavyweight division.
Right.
So I had no problems with these guys up until that point, and I think there was outside influences, people saying I was going to get them. So I don't know. It came as a shock to me, truthfully.
If I could jump in here, because a story that has been often told by all parties that have talked about it, I think Perry Saturn has talked about it, and I think before he passed, Mike Graham had talked about it. Kevin, when did you find out about the apparent incident where Mike Graham went up to Benoit, and I think a few of the other guys were there, and basically said, if you had done to me what you did to Kevin, I would have killed you? And I think he may have even pulled out a knife. When were you made aware of this incident? Because I think they used that to get out of their contracts, right?
Right. Mike Graham wouldn't have pulled the knife, first of all. The second thing is, Mike Graham could probably beat them all up at the same time.
Yeah.
I knew Mike said that, right, Jimmy?
Yeah, well, that's a talk about Benoit being able to stretch Sid. Mike's the one that ran Sid out of the fucking bar in Atlanta with a squeegee in his hand. Yeah, Mike Graham, not only your old tag team partner, you guys have been friends forever, but a fucking power lifter and pretty salty asshole, even though he was, older at that point. If there was something that needed to be done, he could probably have done it.
Yeah, and Brian, I think what you're talking about the knife was, he said, I cut your head off and put it on a steak. He told me that night.
That's right. That was the quote. That was the quote. I would have cut your head off and put it on a fucking steak.
And he came to me that night after they had left and told me what happened. And I thought, whoa. And they wanted Mike fired. And I don't know why they wanted Mike fired. I don't know why they wanted JJ fired. Maybe because their associations with me, but they were very tentative, I guess, about who I had in the office. And I certainly didn't, and I would have, but I certainly didn't have hired JJ. That he came, down from New York, and Mike was hired by Eric. So
Well, there was a couple of different political factions in WCW at that point, and some of them would not have been above